Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Garl did not use any special attacking means, and simply opened his mouth to suck everything in. In the blink of an eye, the abyssal demons were devoured. Only the few abyssal demons that were the furthest away from Garl were lucky enough to leave the devouring range of Garl. The other demons all fell into Garl's mouth. After devouring the abyssal demons, Garl did not return to the team immediately. Instead, under Lin Li's command, he moved his bloated body and switched to another direction before opening his mouth and devouring the compact magic spells and formidable abyssal demons like he did before. Looking at the abyssal demons on the battlefield that were wiped out by Garl in an instant, Archbishop Martin and the others were glad yet regretful. They were glad that they were on the same side with Garl. Since he had exhibited such a terrifying combat power, he would definitely be of much help during the following operations. The regret was that the way he used to destroy the enemy was indeed wasteful. After all, the legendary demons had legendary magical crystals in their bodies. In Anral, legendary magical crystals had always been invaluable and hard to obtain even at high prices. Each legendary magical crystal would be enough to be treated as an heirloom of a family or a force. Although the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were wealthy top forces, which had many legendary magical crystals, the legendary magical crystals meant just as much to them. Whenever Garl devoured a legendary level abyssal demon, it was equivalent to devouring a legendary magical crystal. Although Archbishop Martin and the others knew clearly that it was someone else's battle, spoil that had nothing to do with them, they still felt the pinch when the legendary magical crystals disappeared before them. In the previous battle at the floor below, the abyssal demons were either devoured or turned into ashes by the Monatides because of the Lord Devourer. Hence, the expedition did not gain anything in the end. They initially thought that they would be able to obtain some magical crystals on this floor to at least make up for the previous losses, but it now seemed that their plans were about to be foiled again. Besides, since Garl's devouring applied to all targets, everything within his devouring range would be sucked into his mouth, be it the abyssal demons that were alive or the corpses of the demons that were killed by the Rotterdam Kingdom. The outcome would be that nothing was left behind after peace was restored on the battlefield. Garl, who had devoured a large number of legendary level demons, didn't care about the looks that others were casting at him. He immediately used the power that he had devoured on transforming the host's body. His body continued to expand and his mouth also continued to crack open towards both his shoulders, while the crystalline scales on the body that originally looked as fragile as glass also began to glisten like jewels. Although Archbishop Martin and the others felt that it was quite a shame, there was nothing that they were displeased with. Actually, in their opinion, it would be an extremely lucky thing if they could survive and leave this place. Completing the expedition would then become secondary, and any other thoughts would be extra. At the same time, the people of the expedition were filled with even more fear when they looked at the swollen body of Garl. They initially thought that Garl would need a very long time of accumulation in order to regain his strength after losing the body of the Lord Devourer. However, it was proven that even if Garl did not have that kind of power, he was still a very terrifying existence. A moment later, Garl had already finished transforming his host's body and was wriggling back to the team. He deferentially said to Lin Li, "Respected master, I, your servant, have done what you commanded." However, Lin Li didn't have much of a reaction to Garl's attitude. He simply nodded coldly and said to the rest of the expedition, "Continue going forward." Although Lin Li didn't know much about Garl's character, he had Conorus, who was the master of conspiracy and deception, by his side. Hence, he had already been reminded and knew that Garl was the kind who would get all cocky and arrogant once he was given some compliments. Although Garl was being restrained by the soul contract, and Lin Li did not have to worry about Garl doing anything to harm his interests, he still did not treat him nicely. However, Garl was not displeased with Lin Li's attitude at all. Instead, he felt that that was the attitude that a master should have. He began to show off to Angelano. "So, Shorty, this is the difference between us. Do you now know why your race was annihilated? You can dream on if you think that you can create a noble civilization with a few pieces of lousy metal." This time, Garl dropped all pretense because he knew from Lin Li's attitude that the latter had already seen through his tricks. Since pretending to be innocent was no longer effective, there was no point in making things hard for himself. Hence, as soon as Garl returned, he began bickering with Angelano. "Atrocious, you shameless parasites, you only know how to hide in other people's bodies and steal from them, without any creativity at all. You are the ones who should be annihilated." Angelano cursed at the massive Garl while waving his arms. "So, all you do is hide inside a steel shell. What's the difference between you and us?" Garl retorted in disdain while twisting his body and following the team. Under the lead of Lin Li, the expedition continued to move forward. cracking various magic traps along the way, and slaying all sorts of abyssal demons that swarmed towards them. Angelano and Garl did not stop arguing. However, they kept it verbal, and neither of them initiated a tussle. Due to the fact that Angelano and Garl were arguing in ancient language, the rest of the expedition did not know what they were actually arguing about, and it just sounded like gibberish. Of course, they could tell from their tones that they were going against each other. Lin Li could not be bothered to intervene. As long as they didn't touch the bottom line, he would let them make whatever noise they wanted. Anyway, they were just rivals that would eventually meet. Even if they did not argue, they would find other ways to fight, and it would be better to just have a verbal argument. The most dangerous thing about this floor of the Well of the Sun was not those abyssal demons, but the countless traps that were hidden deep inside. Compared to the traps inside, the power of the Gate of Sunfall was only moderately high. Fortunately, having the experience of exploring this place once, Lin Li could safely say that he knew every inch of this place like the back of his hand. Otherwise, even with his guru-level attainments, he would definitely incur some losses. After all, they were exploring with a large group this time. If there was any danger, the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam might not be able to escape even if Lin Li could do so alone. Archbishop Martin and the others watched as Lin Li commanded his subordinates to crack the hidden traps one after another. They couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. Although they did not research magic traps much, they could still tell from some factors that were similar to mana fluctuations that the explosion of each magic trap would be powerful enough to kill the entire expedition. The treasure of the Immortal King really wasn't that easy to obtain. Having come this far, Archbishop Martin had to admit that even if they mobilized all the power of the Brilliant Shrine, including Pope Rosario, it would still be impossible to get this far. They felt lucky to have met Lin Li, but in fact, Archbishop Martin and the others were already used to being this lucky. The only thing they told themselves to do was to follow Lin Li. During the process of breaking the magic traps, every member of the expedition, be it from the Brilliant Shrine or the Rotterdam Kingdom, had already gradually accepted Lin Li as their supreme leader, and they would subconsciously execute every order of Lin Li before remembering that their leader was Archbishop Martin or Master Donald. Archbishop Martin and the others didn't say a word about this situation other than smiling bitterly to themselves. After all, their hopes of leaving this place were pinned on Lin Li. Only a fool would offend him because of such a trivial matter at this juncture. Besides, in such a dangerous situation, it was necessary to have a single commander. If they were to be selfish and only look out for themselves, they would end up dying. In fact, not to mention the members of the two forces, even Archbishop Martin and Donald could almost be considered obedient to Lin Li at this moment. Of course, it wasn't humiliating for them. After all, Lin Li was a sanctuary powerhouse, an existence that was on a whole other level, that was superior to them. The only one who was a little reluctant about this was probably Prince Canber of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Although he was only at the peak of the legendary realm, he felt a sense of superiority as the successor of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Besides, it wasn't impossible for him to enter the sanctuary realm in the future. Therefore, Canber did not have much respect for Lin Li, the sanctuary powerhouse who was rather mysterious and unheard of. He merely suppressed his emotions a little under the persuasion and request of Donald. Of course, Lin Li could not be bothered to hold it against him, precisely because Canber could still be suppressed. After all, he still needed to use the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom as cannon fodder. With the experience that he had gained before, Lin Li could easily deal with the magic traps that had ingenious designs. They rarely posed an obstacle to the advancement of the expedition. Hence, they advanced through the second floor of the Well of the Sun much more quickly than before. It probably only took a few hours for them to pass through the palace and reach the spiral staircase that led upwards to the next floor. When they saw the spiral staircase, Archbishop Martin and the others almost couldn't believe their eyes. It was practically the smoothest journey that they had ever since they entered the Sky Castle. They actually did not even suffer any losses. Of course, in addition to having Lin Li crack the magic traps and magic gears, Garl's participation also played a considerable role. Some of the abyssal demons that surged towards them were sucked into Garl's body before they could even cast a single magic spell. After Garl acquired a new host's body, the expedition did not engage in many battles, and thus did not suffer any losses. In this situation, the team naturally didn't need to rest. Under Lin Li's orders, the expedition adjusted their formation, stepped onto the spiral staircase, and continued to advance to the next floor rapidly. Of course, in the process, Garl and Angelano argued incessantly. The members of the expedition had already gotten used to it. However, while constantly arguing with Angelano, Garl was also shocked by Lin Li's performance. In the past thousands of years, the magic traps and magic gears had devoured countless abyssal demons, many of which were also peak legendary powerhouses. Hence, Garl was far more aware of the terrors of the magic traps and gears in the Well of the Sun compared to the others in the expedition. In Garl's opinion, Lin Li's performance was simply magical. He did not need any cannon fodder to carefully explore the path in advance. He did not need any clues, either. Instead, it seemed that he was very certain that the magic gears and magic traps were right where they were, and it seemed that he could break all of them. It was as if he was more familiar with this place than he was with his home. Garl even felt as if all the magic gears and magic traps had been laid by Lin Li. Otherwise, how could he have disarmed them so accurately? Actually, even Lin Li himself was a little surprised with how smoothly things were going. It was fine for the same Well of the Sun to appear there. It was also reasonable for the same abyssal demons to appear there. However, how could all those magic traps and magic gears be exactly the same? Lin Li had even discovered some changes that he had made after studying those magic traps during his exploration of the Well of the Sun in the Endless World. At that time, Lin Li explored it alone, and apart from the countless magic traps and gears, he also had to face a large number of abyssal demons. Thus, with his mastery of the magic traps and gears, he modified several of them to help him deal with the abyssal demons. The discovery made Lin Li feel like someone had copied the answers to an examination script wholesale, including the name. That had nothing to do with coincidence. Thinking of this, Lin Li couldn't help but recall the last time he had entered the Sky Castle, during which he even entered the endless labyrinth that he had designed. Even the way he left was exactly the same. Lin Li found that to be bizarre and terrifying. How could such phenomena be explained by coincidence? Although Lin Li had also received a lot of benefits in this world because of these events, such as getting the control crystal of the Sky Castle previously, and subduing Garl plus successfully breaking the magic traps and gears on the second floor now, Lin Li was not in the slightest bit elated, because he had no idea what was the secret hidden behind it. Just like that, the expedition made its way up the spiral staircase to the third floor of the Well of the Sun, each individual having thoughts of their own. The third floor was not gilded like the first few floors. Instead, it was completely pitch dark, as if the end of the stairs led to the endless void. However, in the endless void, there was at least still some light of the erupting nether storm, and there was not a single trace of light here. There was a clear dividing line at the end of the staircase, separating the dark side from the side with golden light. There seemed to be an invisible force that prevented the golden light on this side from illuminating the other side. On the other hand, the darkness of the dark side would not be able to affect the light side at all. The two were like two separate worlds. Respected Master, we're now in the territory of the Lord of Nothingness. Dark. That fellow has the ability to turn everything into nothingness. Even I can't devour anything from him, Garl explained, telling Lin Li everything that he knew about the situation using his mental strength when the expedition was about to enter the darkness. In fact, even if Garl did not say anything, Lin Li would still know because he was very clear about the world of darkness in front of him. Based on his experience in the Well of the Sun in the Endless World, Lin Li knew that the Lord of Nothingness was also an existence that was close to the sanctuary realm, and his ability to transform everything into nothingness would be a tricky problem even for sanctuary powerhouses. Be it magic, natural light, air, or physical objects, they would all be instantly transformed into nothingness by the power of the Lord of Nothingness. It was almost the same as the Void of the Stars technique that sanctuary masters would cast. However, the difference was that the Lord of Nothingness was not subjected to a time limit, unlike sanctuary masters who would return to the real world after the casting was over. Back then, Lin Li had racked his brains, wondering how to pass through this place, and he even had to pay a huge price in order to acquire the debris of the stars and the Stars of Fury. Lin Li spent most of his possessions on the quest to explore the Well of the Sun, which included guru-level potions and superior-grade equipment. The quantity that he lost was almost enough for arming a whole guild in the game. However, Lin Li lost more than half of the items he brought with him to the Lord of Nothingness. However, in the face of the Lord of Nothingness, that would give a sanctuary powerhouse a headache too. Lin Li was definitely not as helpless as he had been, because he now had the real debris of the stars, nothingness, which was the only thing that contained the power to kill the Lord of Nothingness. Masterfully, looking at a world of nothingness at the end of the staircase, Archbishop Martin and the others couldn't help but feel a little daunted. They went up to Lin Li in a bid to ask him, the leader, for his opinion. Suffering losses was definitely inevitable when exploring ruins, but who wouldn't want to reduce the losses they suffered? So far, the team from the Brilliant Shrine had already lost almost a fifth of its members, while the team from the Rotterdam Kingdom lost dozens of alchemy colossuses and metallurgists. Although they could not feel a single tinge of mana fluctuations in the world of nothingness in front of them, Archbishop Martin and the others were even more worried. Although no one knew what kind of dangers were hidden in the nothingness, the unknown was often even more frightening because no one would know what their death would be like and how to prevent it. Although Lin Li intended for the people from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom to become cannon fodder, they would have to be worthy enough. This time, Lin Li, who was well aware of how pervertedly powerful the Lord of Nothingness was almost certain that once the entire expedition entered, no one except the few legendary powerhouses would be able to last a single second at all. Hence, this time, Lin Li did not intend to waste any cannon fodder, as there would be plenty of places for him to use it in the future. Thus, he said, according to what you said, this place belongs to the Lord of Nothingness. It's not suitable for too many of us to enter. Rest and recuperate here while I get rid of it. I'll then inform you guys when to enter. While speaking, he took out the debris of the stars. Nothingness, which was in the shape of a spear, from the ring of endless storm. Hearing that Lin Li intended to enter the world of nothingness, Archbishop Martin couldn't help but show how worried he was. He said, Masterfully, why don't you bring a few more people, or let me accompany you? After all, to Archbishop Martin, Lin Li still had the identity of the son of the Holy Light, and if anything were to happen here, it would be a great loss to the Brilliant Shrine. Besides, everyone in the expedition was still pinning their hopes of leaving on Lin Li. If Lin Li encountered a mishap inside, what would happen to the expedition? Would they be able to leave this world? Donald, who was next to him, quickly sincerely interjected, Yeah, Masterfully, we might not be of much help to you this time, but we can help you fight. Why don't you let us go with you? Compared to Archbishop Martin, Donald was far less genuine about it. He only said those words because he knew that Lin Li wouldn't let anyone tag along. Of course, in Donald's opinion, Archbishop Martin definitely had the same intentions as him. After all, Lin Li was a true sanctuary powerhouse who was much stronger compared to them who were only at the peak of the legendary level. Since Lin Li said that he didn't need any company, he definitely wouldn't want anyone to tag along, no matter the reason. If he could not even deal with the situation as a sanctuary powerhouse, it would be useless to bring any more people over. Lin Li was naturally clear about Donald's thoughts. If it were before, he might really embarrass Donald and put him on the spot. However, Donald was now nothing more than an insignificant ant to Lin Li. Since they did not have any ties with each other, either, Lin Li did not have the time to bicker with him. He waved his hand to reject Archbishop Martin's and Donald's good intentions, and instead strode towards the end of the staircase with the debris of the stars, nothingness. Of course, when Lin Li crossed the obvious line of division on the stairs, the debris of the stars nothingness that he owned also emitted a faint halo of light, making his silhouette appear extremely clear in the dark, even with barely any light. Archbishop Martin and the others knew nothing about the debris of the stars, nothingness, which Lin Li was holding. Hence, they were not too surprised when they saw the scene. However, Garl was suddenly astonished to see it. Due to the existence of the body of the host, no one saw how horrified he was. However, Garl's soul fluctuation could not be covered at all. He had just felt some horror, and even before he had fully experienced it himself, Lin Li had already entered the nothingness and communicated with him via soul contact. Garl, what are you hiding from me? Lin Li's question caused Garl to immediately break out in a cold sweat. As a slave, hiding something from his master would be a serious matter, which would inevitably cause him to be punished no matter what. Garl had already resigned himself to fate and accepted the fact that he would have to spend the rest of his life as a slave. He naturally did not want to be punished for something unnecessary. Hence, Garl was shocked to hear Lin Li's question. Without hiding anything, he said, My noble and wise master, it's my fault for not telling you everything I know immediately. Actually, I only suddenly thought of this matter after I saw you taking out that magical weapon and sensing the magical waves on it. Although it was the first time that Garl had been anyone's servant, he was obviously good at being one. The most important thing about being a servant was that regardless of whether one's master had wrongly accused them or not, the first thing to do was to admit that everything was his or her fault, and that their master would never be wrong at all. The explanation would come after the apology and admittance to their mistakes. Oh, you know this weapon. In fact, when Lin Li asked that question, he had already thought about the fact that the problem might lie with the debris of the stars, nothingness, because Garl's soul began fluctuating when its power was activated. However, in all the years that Lin Li had been in Anral, he had never heard of any legends about the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. In other words, almost no one knew about their existence. The power contained in each piece of the debris of the stars was enough to allow it to be considered an artifact by the people of Anral. However, it was not surprising that the slightest appearance of any of them would cause a huge bloodbath in Anral. How could there not be any legends about them? Hence, in Lin Li's opinion, The only person in this world who knew about the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was probably the immortal king, who had been missing for an unknown number of years. Even Osric, the immortal king's proud disciple, probably did not know about the true origin of the debris of the stars, nothingness, although he once possessed it. However, Garl, a demon who had lived in the well of the sun for thousands of years, actually seemed surprised when he saw the debris of the stars. Nothingness, what did that mean? The power exerted by nothingness was an existence that seemed real yet illusory. Lin Li was completely certain that Garl was definitely not surprised because he had sensed how powerful nothingness was. Hence, Lin Li suspected that Garl knew about the debris of the stars, and had probably seen them too. Lin Li couldn't help but be curious about how Garl knew about them when he had lived in the well of the sun for thousands of years. Hearing Lin Li's next question, Garl knew that he had done the right thing, and continued, "Respected master, I don't know the origin of that magical weapon you're holding, but I feel that its power seems to be somewhat similar to an item here. There are 6 other magical weapons here that contain extremely terrifying power." Hearing this, Lin Li couldn't help but feel a little tempted. Other than nothingness, there were apparently 6 more magical weapons that also contained terrifying power. Could Garl be referring to the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars? However, he now owned all 7 of them. So where did the ones in this world come from? Could there be 7 more? Do you know where those 7 magical weapons you mentioned are? Lin Li became more and more curious. Although he already owned 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and 7 more of comparable power would not be of much use to him, he was not willing to let such powerful magical weapons fall into the hands of others, since he knew how powerful they were. "My respectable master, as far as I know, those 7 magical weapons are most likely in the hands of the owner of this world, and it seems that their power is the very reason that this world is so solid." Despite having lived there for thousands of years, Garl did not have an affirmative answer. After all, in the Well of the Sun, the Lord Devourer's status was not actually high. He could only be considered an existence that was like a watchdog, the owner of this world. Lin Li remembered that, when he explored the Well of the Sun in the Endless World, he did not seem to have encountered a powerful existence that could truly be called that, even though he had killed many powerful abyssal demons. After all, that Well of the Sun was in the world of an online game, hence, the abyssal demons were all ranked up according to their level of strength. Although the abyssal demon on the last floor was considered a big boss level creature, it was not qualified to be the owner of the Well of the Sun. Previously, Lin Li had been able to basically determine that this Well of the Sun was exactly the same as that of the Endless World based on various details. Besides, it was so exaggerated that there were even traces of the magic traps that he had modified. However, now that another owner of the Well of the Sun had suddenly appeared, Lin Li was confused again. Of course, based on common sense, this was actually quite normal. How could the Well of the Sun of 2 worlds really be identical? Lin Li had merely jumped to conclusions at first. Hence, he couldn't accept the difference. If he had not found so many similarities as soon as he entered, he wouldn't have thought that there was anything special about the existence of the owner of the Well of the Sun. However, that also reminded Lin Li not to be too trusting of his own experience. After all, they were 2 completely different worlds. If the previous experience was useful, there was nothing he could complain about even if he hadn't gotten an advantage. If he were to rely solely on his past experience, he might really end up trapping himself there. In this case, what do you know about the owner of this place? No matter where the owner of the Well of the Sun came from, Lin Li was certain that if he and the expedition wanted to get out of this place, the owner of the Well of the Sun would definitely be the key. The owner of the Well of the Sun seemed to be able to master 7 magical weapons that were similar to his debris of the stars. Hence, Lin Li definitely had to pay attention to him. However, to Lin Li's disappointment, Garl did not know much about the owner of the Well of the Sun. Most of the information he had was obtained from other abyssal demons, and he had never seen the true face of the owner of the Well of the Sun with his own eyes, let alone know the details about his combat strength. Seeing that he couldn't provide information that would satisfy his master, Garl began to panic a little. After all, he was still thinking about how he could one-up Angelano. Besides, how could a qualified servant be unable to answer his master's questions? Therefore, after thinking for a moment, he somewhat hesitantly said, "Respected master, I have also heard some rumors from other demons, but I don't know if they're true or not, so go ahead." Lin Li could not blame Garl for anything, because it couldn't be helped that he had a low status. He was just a watchdog. How could he know anything about his owner? Even if he did, it would still be based on hearsay. Yes, rumor has it that the owner of this place already existed when we, abyssal demons, arrived. Garl carefully told Lin Li all the information that he knew. Of course, He had to make up his mind to do it. After all, such information was definitely doubtful since it was obtained from hearsay. It already existed before the abyssal demon arrived. Lin Li immediately heard the problem within it, putting aside the origin of the mysterious owner of the Well of the Sun. According to Garl's statement, it seemed likely that the owner was not an abyssal demon. If it was not an abyssal demon, could it be that it was a high elf that survived, since the Well of the Sun used to be the sun shrine of the high elves? However, the next thing Garl said was beyond Lin Li's expectations. Although we don't know who the one who spread it was, there are rumors that the owner seems to be a human. According to Lin Li's thoughts, the owner would likely be a high elf if it wasn't an abyssal demon. However, he never expected that it would be a human. Could it be another unsung human hero from the Dark Age? However, when Garesko had destroyed the Tree of Eternity back then, the Sun Shrine sunk into the Spacetime Rift and turned into the present Well of the Sun. During that disaster, even the Sun Shrine was half destroyed, and Lin Li couldn't imagine that anyone could have survived that disaster. Could it be Garesko who had gone missing? However, the time when Garesko left Anral didn't tally with the time that the Well of the Sun was formed. Moreover, with Garesko's strength, he could have already shuttled through the void as he pleased. He wouldn't have been trapped in this place. Although Garl said that the owner of the Well of the Sun was probably a human, Lin Li was not happy about it at all. He would never forget how he had obtained the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars from the Well of the Sun in the Endless World. In other words, the other party probably had the real debris of the stars, and that was truly strange. Although he had chatted with Garl for quite a long time, Lin Li did not stop at all. Instead, he continued to walk towards the depths of the endless void. Besides, the debris of the stars, nothingness, that he held was continuously emitting power that seemed real yet illusory. It shrouded him and allowed him to resist the attack of the power of nothingness in the surroundings. Although there was nothingness around him, Lin Li had a clear memory of it in his mind, and the direction he was walking in at this time was exactly where the Lord of Nothingness was hiding. After covering a distance of about a few hundred meters, Lin Li finally stopped, and at the same time raised the void spear in his hand, swinging it into the nothingness. As the void spear cut through the space, a massive rift was formed as if a black cloth had been slashed by a sharp blade. The golden rays of light that belonged to the Well of the Sun were also darting out of the rift in the void. As the rift appeared, a fierce roar was also suddenly heard throughout the space. As the void vibrated rapidly, a pitch-black figure landed in front of Lin Li. However, the pitch-black figure, which was also the so-called Lord of Nothingness, surprisingly did not attack Lin Li immediately after it appeared. Instead, it knelt in front of Lin Li. "Great Supreme Monarch, please pardon my rudeness. I was just sleeping and had no thoughts of disrespecting you." The Lord of Nothingness was almost kneeling in front of Lin Li. Lin Li was taken aback by the Lord of Nothingness' words. "What is going on? Since when did I become a Supreme Monarch? I'm afraid that the only one who could be addressed as the Supreme Monarch by the Lord of Nothingness is the owner of the Well of the Sun." Did this Lord of Nothingness also recognize the debris of the stars like Garl did, and thus mistook me for the owner of the Well of the Sun? However, when Lin Li was being stunned, the Lord of Nothingness suddenly reacted, and his body, which was initially crouched in front of Lin Li, suddenly expanded, and once again filled the entire space, filling up the crack that Lin Li formed. Immediately afterwards, the massive power of nothingness surged towards Lin Li again in a bid to turn Lin Li's body into nothingness. If this is a plot, it's a bit silly. Although Lin Li was stunned, his reaction was not slow at all. A wave of force suddenly emerged from the debris of the stars in his hands, moving towards the attack that was charging at him. The 2 waves of the power of nothingness collided, but it did not result in any fluctuations at all. The power of nothingness seemed to have been immediately swallowed and assimilated by the debris of the stars, nothingness, almost without any resistance. It wasn't that the Lord of Nothingness was too weak, but he just happened to be restrained by the debris of the stars, nothingness. With the power of nothingness, it was simply much easier for Lin Li to deal with the Lord of Nothingness now as compared to in the beginning. The debris of the stars, nothingness, had the advantage of being able to create one huge rift after another. The power of nothingness that spread throughout the space was also devoured in large amounts. Lin Li did not have to speculate to determine the location of the Lord of Nothingness, like he did in the Endless World previously. He did not have to rack his brains to think of battle strategies like he did in the Endless World, either. Now, he had finally experienced the feeling of putting the enemy in a position where they did not know what to do with him. The incoming power of nothingness was only a supplement for the debris of the stars, and could not harm him in the slightest. The Lord of Nothingness, who was hidden in the void, could only watch as his power got devoured, while his domain was sliced up. In just a moment's time, the Lord of Nothingness and the endless void completely disappeared from this world, and the palace that was hidden in it once again shone with dazzling rays of golden light. On a side note, The magic gears on this floor had long lost their effectiveness. Like those in Garl's place previously, almost everything had been transformed into nothingness by the Lord of Nothingness. Those changes might not seem like much to others. After all, they did not understand the power of the Lord of Nothingness, and could not experience the terror he would bring, either. However, Garl, who had lived in this world for thousands of years, understood nothingness very well. Although the Lord of Nothingness could not cast any offensive spells at the enemy unlike other demons, based on his ability to transform everything into nothingness, he could be in the top ranks among all the demon lords in the Well of the Sun. However, the Lord of Nothingness and the Nothingness domain that he had been managing for thousands of years had already been easily destroyed by Lin Li in just a few moments. Although Garl had already signed a soul contract with Lin Li, he still felt a sudden chill. Great Master, you're just as admirable as a deity. Even the sun in the sky of Anral can't compare to your brilliance. It's my honor to be able to become your servant. Seeing that the Lord of Nothingness had been killed, Garl immediately started buttering Lin Li up. Cut the crap and tell them they can come over, Lin Li ordered Garl harshly while thinking about the scene that took place just now. Why did the Lord of Nothingness mistake me for the owner of the Well of the Sun? Is it purely because of the power of the debris of the stars, nothingness? Of course, that was not impossible. After all, the debris of the stars, nothingness, was too unique, and almost no one would believe that there would be two identical sets of the debris of the stars in this world. If the owner of the Well of the Sun really had 7 pieces of the debris of the stars as well, it seemed that it would be normal for the Lord of Nothingness to mistake Lin Li for the owner. However, at the thought of this, Lin Li had another question in mind. Since the Lord of Nothingness had already identified Lin Li as the owner of the Well of the Sun, it meant that the rumors that Garl had mentioned before were true, and the owner of the Well of the Sun was really a human. However, that also meant that the Lord of Nothingness had most likely met the owner of the Well of the Sun. Otherwise, how could he be so sure that the owner of the Well of the Sun was a human? Hence, a question that was even more unfathomable to Lin Li appeared. Since he had seen it, why would he still be mistaken? Garl, what is the Lord of Nothingness' status like here? Could he have seen the owner of the Well of the Sun before? Asked Lin Li, who could not figure it out at all. Although Garl was not doing well there, he was at least the demon lord of a certain floor. Having lived there for thousands of years, he should more or less know something useful. Garl had just relayed Lin Li's instructions to the expedition. After hearing the question, he secretly recalled something, and gloatingly said, although the Lord of Nothingness, Dark, is only on the 3rd floor, he definitely has superior strength here. He was only banished to this place by the owner because of something that he had done. The problem of the Lord of Nothingness was somewhat similar to Garl. One liked to transform everything into nothingness, and the other liked to swallow everything. They were naturally detested by the owner for being so unscrupulous. They were lucky enough not to have been gotten rid of by the owner. The only difference between the two was that Garl was not strong enough to occupy the top position, while the Lord of Nothingness had been banished to the lower floors. In that case, it was very likely that Lord of Nothingness should have met the mysterious owner of the Well of the Sun. Do I have such a common face? Lin Li couldn't help but remember that many people had mistaken him for the Immortal King in the past, as well as recall the Immortal King's statue in the Scar of Death that looked a lot like him. Even when he was in Prince Berhir's mausoleum, Berhir actually called him Father a few times. Is the owner of the Well of the Sun the Immortal King? He has 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and I'm always mistaken for him. Who else could it be other than the Immortal King? The Well of the Sun was originally moved here by the Immortal King, and in a certain sense, the Immortal King was indeed considered the owner of the Well of the Sun. At the thought of this, Lin Li couldn't help but shiver. If he really met the Immortal King, he would be in big trouble. The Immortal King was a powerful existence that was truly the closest to a god in Anral. In the past, Lin Li might have felt that this claim was a bit exaggerated, but after experiencing everything that he had in the previous realms, such a statement was simply modest in his opinion. Are mortals capable of creating worlds and creating life? That method of creation was probably something that even an ordinary god might not be able to master. It was a power that only a truly dominant god of creation could possess. Although Lin Li had already stepped into the sanctuary realm, he was still far inferior to the Immortal King. Even if the 3 arbitrators of the Supreme Council were to join forces, they might not be a match for the Immortal King. However, after Lin Li thought about it carefully, he felt that it did not seem possible. If the owner of the Well of the Sun was the Immortal King, would Ozark still be able to create such trouble in the Sky Castle? Or could it be that the owner was the Immortal King, but had already left this place long ago? At this moment, the expedition team, which had been waiting outside for a long time, also quickly arranged themselves neatly in a single file, and entered after receiving Lin Li's orders. When Archbishop Martin and Donald saw the stern expression on Lin Li's face, They immediately panicked a little before hurriedly going forward to ask, masterfully, "Did you encounter any problems?" It was no wonder that the two of them were that nervous. In their opinion, it would definitely take a huge problem to make a sanctuary powerhouse vexed. Of course, Lin Li wouldn't tell them that he suspected that they might encounter the immortal king here. Besides, there was no evidence yet. Even if there was, he could not just say it, either. Once he did, even Archbishop Martin and Donald would probably collapse immediately. What more the ordinary members of the team? Not everyone had the courage to face the immortal king. Of course, that was just a conjecture. Lin Li could not be certain that they would definitely encounter the Lord of Nothingness. Hence, he simply shook his head and said, "Nothing. I was just thinking about some of the methods that the Lord of Nothingness used to apply some laws." To be honest, his explanation wasn't convincing, but Archbishop Martin and Donald dared not interrogate Lin Li, even if they had some doubts. They had no choice but to accept it. Not only did they accept it, they would have to smile and compliment Lin Li serviently by saying that he was hardworking, and that it was no wonder he had made such accomplishments. Keep moving forward. There are no magic traps or magic gears on this floor. There are no abyssal demons, either, Lin Li said after seeing that the two of them were not saying anything. He was trying to suppress his worries. Just as Lin Li said, the expedition managed to move through that floor successfully. There was not a single abyssal demon at all, and it was as if they were there for a vacation. However, the journey was only easy on that floor. When the expedition entered the fourth floor through the spiral staircase, they began to face difficulties. In the following stages of the exploration, even Lin Li, a sanctuary powerhouse, found it difficult to force his way through with only his strength. He mostly had to rely on his past experience. The appearance of the owner of the Well of the Sun made Lin Li doubt his past experience, but what he was worried about fortunately did not happen during the journey. The abyssal demons and all sorts of magic traps and magic gears were identical to the ones that Lin Li had seen in the endless world. They did not change much because of the appearance of the owner of the Well of the Sun. With his experience, the expedition managed to complete the journey somewhat smoothly, though they were still shocked and frightened. There were some inevitable casualties, but things were much better than the situation they faced on the first floor. In fact, if Lin Li had known that this place would be exactly the same as the Well of the Sun of the endless world, when he fought Garl on the first floor, he would have prepared a heart-piercing potion in advance and saved the expedition from suffering so many casualties. Now, Lin Li was pretty much reliving the experience of breaking into the Well of the Sun. However, he was not alone this time, and had brought a team with him. Back then, Lin Li mostly wanted to use his stealth abilities as a hunter to hide and sneak through some places, but now he had to defeat enemies and overcome the obstacles with the team. Relying on his strength and experience, Lin Li and the team finally arrived at the core of the Well of the Sun after an arduous journey that was full of obstacles. Standing at the end of the spiral staircase, Lin Li felt a little uneasy. He was afraid that he might see the mythical immortal king. However, in order to leave this place, he had to face everything that came his way. Otherwise, he would just need to find a random place where he could live the rest of his life in peace. Of course, there was also the possibility that the immortal king had already left, and there was nothing on this floor except an exit. However, that was just Lin Li's thought. If he were to pin his hopes on a lucky coincidence, he might end up dying without even knowing how he died. Finally, Lin Li took a deep breath, calmed his fluctuating emotions, and commanded the team to enter the last floor of the Well of the Sun. After stepping onto the last floor of the Well of the Sun, they could finally see the sky above their heads, which was already completely different from before. When they were on the lower floors, they could only see a ceiling of golden light when they looked up, but now there was a massive vortex in the sky that was probably even larger than the entire Alana. They could not see the end of it at all. It simply rotated in the sky, emitting a strong aura that made it seem like it was about to collapse and be destroyed. Lin Li was naturally no stranger to that vortex. It was the trauma caused by the collapse of the Tree of Eternity in the past. The vigorous mana tore through the spatial barrier and left behind a huge vortex. Actually, the large vortex in Anral lost its terrifying force that was impossible for even the legendary powerhouses to contend with, only because the immortal king had moved the Well of the Sun and the vortex there. This floor seemed extraordinarily quiet, and no sound was emitted from the palace except for the sounds of the footsteps of the members of the expedition. There were no abyssal demons that came out to block them, nor were there any magic gears and magic traps. They felt the same as they did when they destroyed the Lord of Nothingness on the third floor. Could it be that the immortal king had really left? Lin Li definitely dared not believe it at all. On the contrary, the calmer it was, the more uneasy he felt. Archbishop Martin and the others who did not have such profound knowledge felt surprised after seeing the scene there, after which they could not hide their immense joy. No one enjoyed fighting. Besides, the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam kingdom had already paid a huge price. If they could really leave this place successfully without having to fight, it would naturally make them elated. Soon, the expedition arrived at the core of the palace, where there was an even more majestic and grand golden palace, which was dazzling with an eye-catching light. However, there was a figure above the palace that was emitting 7 differently colored streams of light. They were continuously surrounding the figure and dancing. There were no traces of mana fluctuations on that figure's body. In fact, it didn't seem to be breathing at all. It was just like a lifeless sculpture. Hence, the members of the expedition did not discover the figure above the palace until they reached the center. That figure did not attract the attention of Archbishop Martin and the others, but after Lin Li saw it, he couldn't help but be horrified, because it was a person. The colors of the 7 specks of light that flew around them corresponded to the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Hence, the moment Lin Li saw the figure, he immediately thought of the mysterious owner of the Well of the Sun that the Lord of Nothingness had mentioned. His mana fluctuations and aura were undetectable, not because they did not exist, but because he had completely integrated into this world, and his mana fluctuations had already formed a perfect harmony with this world. He was the world, and the world was him. That was something that only a top powerhouse of the sanctuary realm could do. Seeing that Lin Li had suddenly stopped in his tracks, Archbishop Martin and the others leaned over and asked, "Master Flick, can you determine where the exit of this place is? This place is too big. If we keep exploring, it's going to take a long time." Archbishop Martin and the others did not detect any danger at all. All they wanted to do was to find the door to leave this world as quickly as possible. However, as he said, although this was already the core of the Well of the Sun, it was still very spacious, and it would take a long time for the expedition to search the entire place. In the opinion of Archbishop Martin and the others, Lin Li had always been extremely confident in everything he did during the journey. It was as if he was extremely familiar with the place. Although his behavior could be explained by the fact that he had subdued the Lord Devourer, Garl, Archbishop Martin and the others were all wise and experienced. How could they really believe that explanation that was full of loopholes? From Archbishop Martin's point of view, Lin Li had to have gained knowledge about this place through other ways. After all, the Supreme Council was above the Tower of Dusk, and the Supreme Council was founded by the god of mages, Garesco. Garesco was the only person in the history of the world of Anral who could be compared to the immortal king. In conclusion, even if they could not get a clear answer, they were still certain that Lin Li knew that place very well. Although Donald from the Rotterdam Kingdom wouldn't think of the Supreme Council, and Garesco like Archbishop Martin did, he already found Lin Li, the young sanctuary powerhouse whom he had not heard of, to be extremely mysterious. Hence, he felt that it was normal for Lin Li to know something that the others did not, since he could enter the sanctuary realm at such a young age. However, Archbishop Martin and Donald did not immediately receive a reply after they asked Lin Li for advice. Feeling bewildered, they couldn't help but notice Lin Li's expression, only to realize that it was extremely sullen. He had never reacted that way, regardless of how difficult of a situation they had faced previously. Seeing such a grim expression on Lin Li's face, Archbishop Martin's and Donald's heart sank, and they immediately followed the direction of Lin Li's gaze. Finally, they realized that the target that Lin Li was looking at was the inconspicuous statue-like figure, which did not have any mana fluctuations or aura that they missed previously. In the eyes of Archbishop Martin and the others, it was just a statue, regardless of how realistic and lifelike it was. Given the attainments that the High Elves had in art, that was nothing surprising at all. They thought that it was probably placed at the top of the palace because of worshipping purposes, and that it might be a statue of the immortal king. However, after seeing Lin Li's performance, Archbishop Martin and the others didn't dare to take it for granted anymore. They quickly ordered their team members to quickly go into a defensive mode. The fact that even a sanctuary powerhouse was nervous meant that their respective teams were definitely not strong enough to battle such an existence. Other than being able to do their best to protect themselves by defending against it, what else could they do? At this moment, the figure, which everyone treated as a statue, suddenly spoke. "I never thought that after waiting here for over 1,000 years, I would actually finally see you." Although the figure was facing the entire expedition, Lin Li knew that he was actually talking to him. Lin Li did not understand what exactly that sentence meant, but he felt slightly less nervous. The figure was indeed very terrifying, but since it did not try to kill him immediately, and instead said something to him, it seemed that things hadn't reached their worst yet. Lin Li moved and left the expedition. He flew to the same height as the figure, and stopped at a distance he thought was safe in mid-air. At the same time, he could see the figure's appearance clearly because he was much closer to it now. However, after taking a look, Lin Li lost all his composure again, and shock began to rise from the bottom of his heart. It was written all over his face. He finally knew why the Lord of Nothingness and the Abyssal Demons, that he encountered in the past had mistaken him for the owner of this Well of the Sun. It was because the figure in front of him looked almost like an identical clone of him, be it in terms of features or build. The only difference between Lin Li and that figure was their respective attire. Lin Li was wearing the space robe that the immortal king had created, while the figure was wearing black leather armor. However, the different attire was exactly the reason that Lin Li was shocked. The figure's appearance was secondary. It was because Lin Li was very familiar with the black leather armor that the figure was wearing. He was so familiar with it that he could even tell exactly where every part of that black leather armor came from and the power they possessed. The reason was that the black leather armor was exactly what Lin Li had worn when he had explored the Well of the Sun. It was known as the King of Hunters' armor and was said to be the most powerful hunter's armor in the endless world. The helmet of the King of Hunters' suit had a top-notch eagle eye skill, which would allow one to easily launch a fatal shot at a mouse from a kilometer away bound to it. It also came with a skill that would allow one to see through invisibility and expose a top assassin. The King of Hunters' torso might not have the strongest defensive ability, but it did have top-notch camouflage effect. Lin Li managed to explore the entire Well of the Sun and obtain the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars alone thanks to the camouflage effect. The King of Hunters' gloves could increase the rate of fatal strikes to 50%, which meant that every second arrow would be a fatal strike. It could also increase an archer's accuracy. Even those who had never touched a bow, an arrow could immediately become a sharpshooter. The King of Hunters' wrist guard came with an individual storage space that could store a large number of arrows and increase the speed of rapid-fire shots. Besides, it could add additional magical damage to every shot launched by arrows pulled out when one was wearing the wrist guard. Those who had a pair of such wrist guards would be a human cannon that could rapidly shoot continuously. The King of Hunters' pants came with a shift skill that would allow the wearer to evade quickly and dodge a fatal attack once the skill was activated. On the other hand, the King of Hunters' boots would allow the wearer to move quickly and stay immune to any environmental impacts. During a burst, the wearer could even leave the battlefield immediately. The King of Hunters' armor would turn even a third-rate hunter into a powerhouse among hunters. Back when Lin Li was still a hunter in the endless world and had yet to obtain the Stars of Fury and the debris of the stars, he still managed to establish a prestigious reputation as the King of Hunters in the entire game world just by relying on the impeccable effects of the armor set. At this juncture, Lin Li had also finally figured out that the figure in front of him, who was wearing the King of Hunters' suit, was the hunter that he was when he barged into the Well of the Sun in the endless world. However, the problem was, why did his hunter character transmigrate together with him? It seemed to have transmigrated at the same time, and it actually waited for him alone in that place for over 1,000 years. Damn it, this is too confusing. Did my account get hacked when I transmigrated? Lin Li really wanted to find the customer service attendants of the endless world and ask them what exactly they had done to his hunter account. Unfortunately, he would not have that opportunity. Who exactly are you? And why are you like this? Since Lin Li did not have the chance to question the customer service attendants of Endless World, he had no choice but to ask the unknown person who had stolen his account. From what the figure said just now, Lin Li could actually tell that the former had expected that he would be able to transmigrate to the world of Anral. However, he wasn't too sure either. Otherwise, the other party wouldn't have said that he had been waiting for Lin Li to appear for thousands of years and not say anything after Lin Li eventually did. No matter what, Lin Li was certain that his transmigration definitely had something to do with the other party. Being able to transmigrate to Anral was frankly a good thing to Lin Li. After all, in the world that he came from, he was just an ordinary homebody. No matter how outstanding of a gamer he was neither the son of a high-ranking government official nor a wealthy heir. He could only generate a small income by selling a few pieces of game equipment, and if he were to call himself a professional player, others would only look at him with disdain. He was a far cry from what he was now, the president of the Tower of Dusk and a sanctuary powerhouse, who was high above many in Anral. Putting aside the glory and prestige he enjoyed, the fact that he could enjoy a long lifespan of thousands of years after stepping into the sanctuary realm was something that the world that he transmigrated from could not compare to. Although this world seemed to be a little more dangerous as he had explored the place numerous times in the past few years and experienced several near-death encounters, that did not mean that the world he was in previously was absolutely safe. In short, Lin Li was quite satisfied with the current situation. In the previous world, he would never be able to achieve all of these. However, that did not mean that he was going to thank the person who'd sent him there. God knew what kind of conspiracy there was behind it. He did not want everything that he had obtained in Anral to become just a dream. That concern was the reason that Lin Li became more and more concerned about the secret behind his transmigration to Anral. He wanted to be the master of his own destiny and not be in a passive position like before he transmigrated to Anral. However, the other party didn't answer Lin Li's question, and acted like he didn't hear it at all. Seemingly a little regretful, he said, "Unfortunately, you've arrived too late. I've already left this world. You have to wait for the next opportunity." When he heard this, Lin Li had actually already made guesses about the other party's identity. The other party looked extremely similar to him, and also owned 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. At the same time, he was also the owner of the Well of the Sun. It seemed that he could only be the mythical immortal king, who could rival the gods. Besides, Lin Li could also tell that regardless of whether the other party was the immortal king, or some kind of existence, the figure in front of him who was donning the King of Hunters set was definitely not his real form, but an incarnation that he created. However, even if it was an incarnation, Lin Li did not dare to be careless. The immortal king was an impeccable existence, and the incarnation he created was definitely not something that someone like him, who had just entered the sanctuary realm, could contend with. However, apart from knowing that the figure was just an incarnation, Lin Li also had more doubts about the other party's words. "Do you have something to do with the reason that I'm here? Do you mean that you've left Anral, or?" Lin Li couldn't think of a way to express his question for a moment. The other party said that he has already left this world, but which world is he referring to? The worlds here include Anral, the undead world, the dark shadow world, and the worlds that the sanctuary powerhouses created. There are also countless other unknown worlds in the endless void. However, the world that he came from was definitely not one of the many worlds here. Hence, did the other party leave Anral, or the collective of all the worlds here? Also, why do I have to wait for the next opportunity? Isn't this decided based on the strength of the individual? Is the immortal king unable to travel freely between worlds as well? Or does this so-called opportunity refer to the type of transmigration that brought me here to Anral? While Lin Li was struggling to understand the concept of this world, the figure spoke again. "You will get an answer to these questions, but not now. What you need to do now is to defeat this incarnation I left behind and prove your strength. When you appear in the place in the Well of the Sun where you should be appearing, and find the item I left behind, perhaps we can truly meet." The other party's words made Lin Li feel helpless for a while. After all, the other party was just an incarnation that perhaps had a wisp of soul brand left behind by the immortal king. If he wanted to get all the answers he wanted to know from the incarnation, it would probably be akin to questioning a video recording. Of course, Lin Li was at least certain now that his transmigration to Anral was most likely related to the immortal king. The only thing that made him feel puzzled was that his hunter game avatar was actually present there. He did not know how the hunter had become the incarnation of the immortal king. However, no matter how many questions he had, Lin Li did not have time to consider anymore. After that figure said those words, a ray of light suddenly darted out from the figure and shot into the massive vortex in the sky. Immediately afterwards, the figure that was initially as calm and still as a statue immediately changed shockingly as the light disappeared. The entire space in the Well of the Sun began vibrating and roaring loudly like a human's heartbeat. In the sky, the large vortex that was slowly rotating also gradually began speeding up after the white light penetrated it. At the same time, countless razor pythons began glistening and jumping around in the vortex. The plain black leather armor of the figure standing at the top of the palace gradually began emitting colorful streams of light that made the figure look like a descending god. Even the shiny golden glow of the Well of the Sun seemed somewhat dim, thus becoming the backdrop that accentuated its brilliance. Of course, Lin Li was no stranger to this splendid brilliance, because it was radiated from the superior grade gemstones that he had embellished the King of Hunters set with back then. However, he had always covered the glow of the gemstones on the set because he didn't like attracting too much attention everywhere he went. The basic stats of the King of Hunters set were initially already very strong. Besides, Lin Li had also used gemstones that were worth more than 1 million yuan, causing the stats of the set to increase by several times. The King of Hunters set, which was considered an excellent set of equipment second only to the debris of the stars and the stars of fury, was the thing that allowed Lin Li to reach the pinnacle of the endless world game. Unfortunately, in the past, Lin Li's enemies and opponents were the ones who had to deal with the troublesome King of Hunters set, but this time, it was Lin Li's turn. As the brilliant light radiated, tidal waves of mana began to surge outwards with the immortal king's incarnation at its center. Under the mana waves, there began to be clear, warped ripples in the golden light that filled the sky, resembling the waves of the sea in a storm where the immortal king's incarnation was in the middle. The members of the expedition below had all gone into a defensive stance, where they tensed up as soon as Lin Li discovered the incarnation of the immortal king at the top of the palace. Afterwards, they saw Lin Li leave the team and actually start a conversation with that figure. Only then did they feel a little less nervous, as they thought that they probably wouldn't have to do anything this time. However, to their surprise, the situation changed extremely quickly. The figure that looked just like a statue and was having a friendly conversation with Lin Li erupted with a terrifying aura in the blink of an eye. The emotions of the members of the expedition fluctuated. The stark contrast made them feel so uncomfortable that they wanted to vomit blood. Fortunately, the team consisted of elites of various forces, hence, they did not relax entirely because of the slight relief they felt just now. They did not get flustered and mess up because of the sudden mana fluctuations, either. However, even then, the members of the expedition who were on the defensive and keeping their guard up were still involuntarily pushed backwards. Although many of them were legendary powerhouses, and they also had large alchemy colossuses and elites who formed various battle formations, the power of the mana fluctuations were difficult for the expedition to deal with. They were being pushed backwards by the force like ants that were unable to resist against giants. Sensing the terrifying mana fluctuations, Archbishop Martin's face turned as pale as a sheet, and his confidence in Lin Li had also begun to waver while they were retreating. As an Archbishop of the Brilliant Shrine, Archbishop Martin had also participated in the fight against the Black Current in the Sunset Mountains, where the Brilliant Shrine cooperated with the Supreme Council. He had personally experienced the power of the three arbitrators of the Supreme Council and Pope Rosario. Hence, Archbishop Martin was much clearer about the power of sanctuary powerhouses compared to the others. Archbishop Martin could completely feel that the strength displayed by that figure was probably similar even to Pope Rosario's, and it was much stronger than Lin Li, who had just advanced to the sanctuary realm. He felt that he could no longer rely on his backer, Lin Li. Having made this conjecture, Archbishop Martin was extremely helpless. As for Donald and the others from the Rotterdam Kingdom, they were absolutely horrified. They were well aware that in the eyes of a sanctuary powerhouse, they were just a bunch of insignificant ants, who definitely would be abandoned during times of crisis, especially since their relationship with the Tower of Dusk had always been strained. How could the Tower of Dusk be willing to take care of them during the crucial juncture? However, fortunately, the bunch of ants from the expedition were not taken seriously by the incarnation of the Immortal King, and were now enduring only the impact of the mana fluctuations. Otherwise, given the strength of the Immortal King's incarnation, they would probably face a huge calamity with a lift of the incarnation's finger. Of course, Lin Li did not have anything to rejoice about, because the incarnation was a test that the Immortal King had given him. At the thought of this, Lin Li was so enraged that he began cursing the Immortal King's ancestors in his heart. What kind of test is this? This is just a plot to murder me. Indeed, in the face of this incarnation left behind by the Immortal King, that erupted with vigorous mana fluctuations now, Lin Li immediately sensed that the fluctuations were definitely not something that he could contend with. He was just a level 25 greenhorn that had entered the sanctuary realm recently. However, the incarnation had level 28 strength. In the sanctuary realm, the difference between every level was worlds apart. Besides, there was a difference of 3 levels between them. Even Lin Li felt unsteady under the mana fluctuations that erupted from the Immortal King's incarnation. He felt as helpless as a boat in a storm. Even though Lin Li was also in the sanctuary realm, he still felt extremely small, as if he were looking up at a tall mountain that reached as high as the clouds. With the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, the combat power that Lin Li was able to exert was indeed far beyond that of an ordinary level 25 sanctuary powerhouse. However, the Immortal King's incarnation also had 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Besides, he was also wearing the King of Hunters set that was embellished with superior grade magical gemstones, while Lin Li was wearing only a space robe. The only thing that could give Lin Li a sense of comfort was the fact that the Immortal King's incarnation did not have the Stars of Fury, which was a terrifying weapon that could maximize the power of the debris of the stars. Otherwise, Lin Li could just get ready to be killed by the other party. He would at least die a little faster and happier. Using the Hunter Avatar and the power of the debris of the stars and the Stars of Fury, Lin Li managed to kill the powerful demigod Azardus, the Dragon of Destruction. Although Lin Li had now stepped into the sanctuary realm, and had hopes of becoming a demigod-level existence, he would not be so conceited as to think that he was now stronger than the Dragon of Destruction. At this juncture, the 7 specks of colorful light around the incarnation of the Immortal King were speeding up quickly, forming a brilliant stream of light, while expanding the range of the revolving light. Next, Lin Li saw countless world shadows that were continuously emerging from the 7 spinning pieces of the debris of the stars. They were not virtual shadows, but real worlds. However, time passed much faster there than in the Well of the Sun. It was as if the entire history of the rise and fall of the world was being displayed in a split second. In those worlds, there were countless beings that were being reproduced in chaos, thus allowing the worlds to grow rapidly before falling during their prime. In the end, they were destroyed in a major calamity. Seeing this scene, Lin Li got chills. Clearly, the other party was no longer limited to the hunter profession. The countless worlds that were constantly emerging and being destroyed were exactly what the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars had evolved from. They were true sanctuary-level magical domains. Those worlds were real, and so were the beings in them. The person who controlled the magical domains was the creator of those worlds, and being able to create worlds was a level that only those that were at the peak of the sanctuary realm could reach. In Anral, the profession of mages was known as the best of all precisely because a mage could create their own magical domain, with their comprehension of nomological power after entering the legendary realm. In the magical domain, the mage who created it would be the master. That was something that other professions like sword sages and assassins could not achieve. Hence, most of the time, mages who had their own magical domains would be able to exert much more combat power than other professions at the same level. Besides, the difference would become even more obvious once one reached the sanctuary realm, because mages in the sanctuary realm were true sages in the entire world. Therefore, if the incarnation of the immortal king was just a hunter that was 3 levels superior to Lin Li was not truly helpless. However, the incarnation of the immortal king had already given him a direct blow before he could even activate his magical domain. Lin Li was extremely bitter when he looked at the scene of the rise and fall of the worlds. The immortal king was clearly out to kill him. However, Lin Li had no other choice but to fight. When the immortal king left just now, he had already secretly experimented with the Sky Castle's control crystal, but he didn't get any reaction. In fact, after thinking about it, he realized that it made sense since the Sky Castle belonged to the immortal king, and the control crystal was left behind by him. The Well of the Sun was also in the world created by the immortal king. Since the immortal king had given Lin Li such a test, how could he have missed out the loophole of the control crystal? Therefore, even though he knew that he was much weaker than the immortal king's incarnation, Lin Li had no choice but to bite the bullet and go toe-to-toe against it. With that realization, Lin Li dared not hold back at all. The moment that the immortal king's incarnation displayed that power, Lin Li, too, activated all 7 pieces of his debris of the stars. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, namely holy light, gloomy dark, polar snow, raging flames, thunderbolt, rebirth, and nothingness, were all presented in different forms and glowing with different colors. They were continuously flying around Lin Li. Under Lin Li's control, the 7 laws of origin that constituted the world formed another domain world in Lin Li's surroundings. It looked like another world that was somewhat illusory, as if it existed in another dimension. However, compared to the immortal king's incarnation, Lin Li's world domain was obviously inferior. The world laws that the immortal king mastered contained countless worlds that were emerging and getting destroyed. The destruction of each world would produce a terrifying force that would make everything collapse. That was the power that could only be comprehended and mastered by a sanctuary powerhouse who had reached the peak of the sanctuary realm and possessed the ability to break through the restraint of the world laws of this world. However, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that Lin Li controlled merely formed a seemingly stable world that was slowly developing. It looked barren and desolate, devoid of any signs of life or vitality. However, Lin Li had to create such a world because he had devoured a portion of the soul memory of Ozric's clone. In the world of Alana back then, the immortal king's soul imprint had already said everything that should have been said. The only purpose of the incarnation was to kill Lin Li. With the release of the magical waves, the incarnation finally awoke from his slumber with killing intent in his eyes. Next, he pointed his hand at Lin Li, and his magical domain that consisted of worlds that were continuously spawning and getting destroyed collided with Lin Li's magical domain. The sounds of the collision of the magical domains of the 2 sanctuary powerhouses was groundbreaking and earth-shattering. The shock waves of the collision alone caused the entire Well of the Sun to vibrate violently like a boat in a storm. It was as if it would topple over at any moment. Amidst the vibrations, there were groans coming from the surrounding space, as well as the sounds of things shattering continuously. Various space rifts continuously opened up and closed in the void. Fortunately, this world was created by the immortal king, and despite the collision between the magical domains of 2 sanctuary powerhouses, it did not collapse, and instead continuously repaired itself. However, the people in the expedition below were in a dire situation. They were initially already forced to retreat because of the magical waves that were erupting from the immortal king's incarnation. The aftershock of the collision of the 2 sanctuary-level magical domains was the reason that the magical defenses of the expedition continuously shattered one after another, and even the casting speed of the tender elemental worm Xiaohua could not make up for the broken magic defenses in time. Watching the violent collision of magical domains in the sky, and feeling the power of the unstoppable aftershocks, made Archbishop Martin feel like he was on the verge of tears. He initially thought that he could earn a fortune in the Sky Castle, but after experiencing the consecutive ordeals, he felt terribly vexed as they were all almost fatal. Archbishop Martin and the others finally understood that even if they reached the peak of the legendary realm, and were said to be only one step away from the sanctuary realm, they were still insignificant in the eyes of the sanctuary powerhouses, who could crush them without even using any special means. Since the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom had never been repaired due to the fact that the expedition's members were putting up defenses, they could only hide in the team and rely on the defensive spells of the other two forces to resist the powerful impacts. However, in the collision this time, the layers of magic defense were shattered one after another. In the end, the members of the Brilliant Shrine and the Tower of Dusk could only fend for themselves. No one could be bothered to defend the large alchemy colossuses. The aftershock of the sanctuary-level magical domains collision alone instantly swept up the several alchemy colossuses that were at the front of the team. Their massive bodies were blown upwards like leaves that fell in the wind, unable to resist at all. The alchemy colossuses below lit up before exploding because of the mana. Afterward, they were slammed at a spot much further away from the expedition, with no means to stand up at all. Although the rest of the members of the expedition were close together because of the unique battle formations of their respective forces, they were in a mess when continuously compensating for the defensive magic layers that were destroyed. The few powerhouses who were at the peak of the legendary realm almost fought with all their might to sustain the impact, but the fear in Evrion's eyes would not dissipate. In the sky, Lin Li no longer had any time to care about the situation of the expedition. Faced directly with the incarnation of the Immortal King and the collision, he was in an even more dangerous situation than the expedition. The moment the two domains collided, the domain world that Lin Li controlled seemed to have reached its doomsday as the sky collapsed and the earth shattered, followed by the mass deaths of the living creatures that had evolved in it. The space of the domain world also seemed to have broken like glass during the collisions, creating large cracks that not only destroyed the spatial structure of the domain world, but also devoured the power that constituted the world. Even though Lin Li possessed nearly infinite mental strength, and was trying his best to control the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to stabilize and strengthen the magical domain, the collision that did not involve any fancy tricks still put him in a very dangerous situation. The domain world that Lin Li controlled was constantly shattering from the impact of the collision, and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that were integrated into the domain kept flickering and appearing, as if they would be forced out of the domain world at any moment. Damn it, who's the sanctuary mage here? Through the collision of magical domains, Lin Li could completely feel that the domain controlled by the Immortal King's incarnation was far stronger and more solid than his own. The collision was akin to a collision between an egg and a rock. The incarnation's magical domain was a rock while his was a fragile egg. Moreover, through such a collision of domains, Lin Li also gained a clear understanding that the Immortal King's incarnation used the debris of the stars to create this world, and not any other magical weapon. Lin Li could not figure out why there were 2 identical sets of debris of the stars, but he knew that he was clearly far inferior to the Immortal King's incarnation in terms of controlling his. Lin Li didn't dare to continue colliding. Even though he had survived the collision once, his magical domain might really shatter like an egg if it were to happen once or twice more. He held the Helios scepter again, and quickly gathered the full power of his domain on the scepter while repairing the spatial rifts in his domain world. However, just as Lin Li was about to launch a counterattack against the Immortal King's incarnation, he saw the latter doing something that frightened him out of his wits. The incarnation in its magical domain suddenly raised its hand towards the void, and countless specks of light appeared in the sky at the same time. Next, the inconspicuous orbs converged and gathered towards the hand of the incarnation in large amounts, quickly forming a hunting bow that had a quaint design. The Stars of Fury. Lin Li couldn't help but shudder with his eyes wide open. Lin Li was way too familiar with the hunting bow in the hand of the Immortal King's incarnation. It was the Stars of Fury, the only weapon that could maximize the power of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Previously, Lin Li was still feeling thankful and glad that although the Immortal King's incarnation possessed the debris of the stars, he did not have the Stars of Fury. However, in the blink of an eye, the Stars of Fury actually appeared in the incarnation's hand. It was almost the bane of his existence. The combination of the debris of the stars and the Stars of Fury would be strong enough to even attack the gods in the sky. What more a greenhorn like him who had just recently stepped into the sanctuary realm? In his heart, Lin Li once again cursed the Immortal King thoroughly. At the same time, he dared not dawdle, and pointed forward the Helios scepter, which contained the condensed power of the world. It was not some type of magic spell, but a mere application of the 7 types of power that constituted the world. At this moment, they merged to form a 7-colored pillar of light that attacked the Immortal King's incarnation with a groundbreaking might, continuously penetrating the domain world. In the blink of an eye, countless worlds were pierced through and destroyed. However, Although the Immortal King's incarnation was only less than a kilometer away from Lin Li, the seven-colored pillar of light that constantly pierced through the world still did not manage to attack the incarnation. It was as if the distance between the incarnation and Lin Li was infinitely extended under the effect of the countless worlds that were spawning and being destroyed. Perhaps the seven-colored pillar of light might still be unable to strike the target even after a day or two. At this moment, the Immortal King's incarnation had also raised the stars of fury in his hand and grabbed the air with his other hand. An arrow that was made of the power of the world appeared. The incarnation then skillfully put the arrow on the bow and pulled it, after which the arrow flew through the layers of worlds, instantly colliding with the seven-colored pillar of light, with the sounds of the bowstring shattering. In a split second, the colorful pillar of light that was in contact with the arrow shattered into bits, and the arrow shot in the direction that the pillar of light had come from, towards Lin Li. From the way the stars of fury appeared, Lin Li knew that the stars of fury that the Immortal King's incarnation had was definitely not authentic. It was very likely that it had been condensed by the Immortal King using his mana. When he explored the Sky Castle for the first time, the debris of the stars, thunderbolt, that appeared in the last realm of the seven-realm spiral was in the form of a bow that the Immortal King created using the laws of the stars of fury in his mana. Hence, he had long known that the Immortal King had such an ability. However, Lin Li could also feel that the stars of fury in the Immortal King's hand, which was also condensed with magic power, was much more powerful than the one in the seven-realm spiral. When he saw the arrow darting over, he was shocked and turned as pale as a sheet. If the arrow were to hit him, his life would really be over. Lin Li quickly waved the Helios scepter, and the barren domain world immediately underwent earth-shattering changes. The 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that had integrated into the domain world displayed their power in different forms, forming solid layers of defense. However, the arrow shot by the Immortal King's incarnation was extremely powerful, so much so that it could shatter the sky, shoot down the sun, and crush the earth. It broke through the obstacles without pausing, and shot straight towards Lin Li's heart. Throughout the years that he spent in Anral, Lin Li had experienced quite a few threats to his life, and he was lucky to have survived every time. However, even during the most dangerous moment, he had never truly felt hopeless. However, this time he could but suppress the feeling of death approaching in the face of the arrow. The Stars of Fury was not only a bow that could maximize the power of the debris of the stars, but also one that could be called an artifact. Even without the debris of the stars, it could make ordinary arrows exert terrifying power. Although the Immortal King's incarnation did not use the debris of the stars this time, he used the power of the debris of the stars to condense an arrow that contained power that Lin Li could not contend with. Compared to the magical domain controlled by the Immortal King's incarnation, the magical domain that Lin Li created with the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars was rather shabby, and it did not have a strong defense like the incarnation's. The arrow that came flying in was not affected in the slightest by Lin Li's resistance. It reached Lin Li in no time. Lin Li stimulated the space robe on his body in the nick of time, and the moment the arrow shot into his body, it flashed and moved in another direction. However, before he could stabilize his body, the incarnation of the Immortal King had already controlled the magical domain, and it collided again with his menacingly. With a loud bang, the entire space shook violently from the impact of the collision of the domains, and some of the tall buildings in the Well of the Sun also collapsed amidst the violent shock. The entire layer was slashed away. Lin Li's domain world also began to collapse tremendously, turning into a fragmented one that looked extremely miserable. It seemed to be on the verge of being destroyed at any moment. Lin Li did not feel glad about escaping the arrow at all. Instead, the skin of his body was cut badly in the collision this time, and his robe was immediately stained with blood. The members of the expedition below encountered an even greater crisis during the second collision of the 2 domain worlds again. Countless specks of light were shaken out of the Immortal King's incarnation's domain world. The specks of light looked just like fireflies at night, which did not seem dangerous at all. However, when those specks of light fell to the ground, they immediately expanded, and a horrifying scene took place next. Large and powerful armies of humans, orcs, and high elves emerged from the specks of light that formed a halo. The armies were all creatures from the world domain that the Immortal King's incarnation had created. Just like in this world, they had professions such as mages and warriors, including many at the legendary level. That was the reason that those below the sanctuary realm were just like insignificant ants to the sanctuary powerhouses. The creatures that looked like living beings were simply like a nest of ants that the sanctuary powerhouses randomly tossed out. However, to the people of the expedition, The group of opponents were not just ants that they could crush to death easily, although every world would be spawned and destroyed in a split second in the domain of the immortal king's incarnation. The concept of time was completely different for the creatures in those worlds. Hence, the armies that appeared were not products that could be spawned quickly. Each of them had rich experiences in life. Just like the members of the expedition, cavalry soldiers with heavy armor charged out one after another, each holding heavy lances. Fresh blood could still be seen dripping from the heavy armor of the cavalry. They had obviously just experienced a bloody war before arriving. The heavily armored cavalry collided with the holy light knights of the expedition, after which more than a dozen holy light knights fell off their horses in the blink of an eye. They were then crushed into minced meat by the hooves of the horses that came afterwards. If the holy light knights did not have the holy light battle song, the holy light knights would definitely have a hard time dealing with it too. In the fight between the two teams, the Holy Light Knights were clearly at a disadvantage, and had lost the upper hand. The heavily armored cavalry was just the beginning. Next, infantry clad in heavy armor appeared. Those soldiers were much taller and burlier than the people in Anral. Besides, they were just like mobile fortresses with their heavy armor. They were pointing their spears diagonally at the sky, and advancing orderly with heavy footsteps while surrounding the entire expedition. They slowly closed in on them, and restricted the space that they had. Fire! There was a loud roar from the Rotterdam Kingdom's team, after which 10 mana cannons that each had the diameter of a bucket shot out from the spaces between the alchemy colossuses, blasting straight at the infantry troops. Special alchemy colossuses like the mobile magical crystal cannons were almost useless in the world of the dead. However, this time they weren't facing any abyssal demons or other terrifying creatures, but an army made up of humans. However, they revealed the variety of weapons that they had for war. Although the infantry troops were fully equipped from head to toe, at the end of the day, they did not have powerful magical defenses. The 10 mana cannons immediately formed, 10 froze in the enemy army. Hundreds of infantry soldiers were melted by the mana cannons without even screaming. An ordinary army would long have collapsed after suffering such casualties, but this army was a powerful and strong infantry troop. The casualties and injuries of their comrades did not slow them down at all. They were still as determined as before. Hurry, continue firing, Prince Canber of the Rotterdam Kingdom yelled hysterically. Although he was already a powerhouse that was at the peak of the legendary level, he still couldn't help but get chills when he saw how brazen and fearless the infantry troops were. In fact, there was no need for Canber to even give any instructions. The 10 mobile magical crystal cannons had already adjusted their shooting angle, and began to recharge once again. The light from the mana flickered in front of the cannons, and as soon as Canber said those words, the 10 mana cannons had already been launched again at the densely packed heavily armored infantry troops. However, a magical barrier suddenly appeared as soon as the mana cannons touched the vanguard of the infantry this time. Although it was very fragile and shattered instantly, another one appeared right behind it, and weakened the power of the mana cannons. Although the mana cannons still killed plenty of the heavily armored infantrymen in the end, their accomplishments were obviously worse than before. The people from the expedition had already seen a number of mages appearing in midair using the levitation spell. They were behind the troops, and it was no doubt that the magical barrier that appeared was cast by them. However, they did not reveal any special expressions when looking at the heavily armored infantrymen that had died. The mobile magical crystal cannons were still firing mana, but anyone could tell that their results were becoming poorer. The mages from the opposing team were gradually adjusting to the attacks of the magical crystal cannons. They would probably lose their effects in no time. Under the protection of the mages, the footsteps of the heavily armored infantry were also getting faster and faster. Those in the first few rows had already put down their spears, and were clearly planning to charge straight towards the expedition. At this moment, the mages of the expedition finally showed their prowess, especially the mages of the Tower of Dusk. Under Basil's and Alan's commands, all sorts of powerful magic spells began crashing down like a thunderstorm. Many heavily armored infantrymen were immediately killed by the magic spells. Besides, the corpses also caused some impediment in advancement of the heavily armored infantry. However, the people of the expedition did not have time to heave sighs of relief at all. The mages of the enemy's team had already begun to counterattack, and countless magic spells flew towards the expedition. Although the opposing mages were all from the worlds that appeared and got destroyed in a split second, their abilities were not inferior to those of the mages of the expedition team at all. The number of mages alone was already more than 10 times that of the expedition. Besides, their individual strength was all above level 15, and there were also quite a few legendary mages, some of which were at the peak of the realm. If they were merely competing in terms of mages, the expedition might not be able to resist the attacks and hold on, but they fortunately had the tender elemental Wyrm, Xiaohua, and the Lord Devourer Garl. With the support of infinite mana, Xiaohua was instantly generating legendary-level magic spells in large quantities. Each legendary-level magic spell would cause a large number of soldiers to die. Although the Lord Devourer Garl was no longer as terrifying as he used to be, he could, after all, still exhibit his devouring abilities since he now had a host. His giant mouth, which had extended to his shoulders, opened like a black hole, swallowing a large amount of magic spells that were cast by the enemy mages in a single gulp. In fact, Garl's devouring ability was not really uncontrollable and indiscriminate, but when he had still been the Lord Devourer, he hadn't cared whether those abyssal demons under his command lived or died, so he naturally hadn't bothered going out of his way to control his power carefully. However, he could not do that now that he was also a member of the expedition. If he were to use his devouring ability haphazardly, Lin Li definitely would not spare him. After devouring the enemy's incoming magic spells in one gulp, Garl turned his mouth towards the ground, and his massive, devouring force immediately pulled some of the heavily armored infantrymen off the ground and into his giant mouth. In the entire expedition, Garl was perhaps the only one who could fight the battle with relative ease. While others were displaying all the power they had, he just had to binge eat. The battle was simply a pleasure for Garl. Not only did he not have to exert any effort, he could also constantly increase his strength by devouring the infantry troops. After devouring more than 10 of them, Garl even smacked his lips revoltingly and hiccuped ungracefully. "Disgusting, you disgusting bastard. Do those tin cans even taste like anything?" Angelano mocked rudely when he saw Garl stealing the limelight during the battle. Faced with Angelano's mocking, Garl naturally did not tolerate it. While controlling the magic spells cast by the enemies by devouring them, he retorted in a dull and low voice, "Shut up, you stinky dwarf. Even if you jump into my mouth yourself, I won't devour you, because you're disgusting. Oh please, if you have what it takes, let's have a contest. Let's see if you're going to devour me, or I'm going to beat you up, you ugly fellow." Although Angelano possessed an excellent suit of armor to protect him, he was still carefully hiding in the team of the Tower of Dusk and stomping his feet while cursing at Garl. Among the members of the entire expedition, only Angelano and Garl had the time to argue with each other. The others were all frowning and feeling troubled because the enemies that they were facing at this moment were not just those human troops, but also others like the heavily armored cavalry, infantry troops, and mages. The enemies of various professions, who were in different forms, were also emerging from those floating specks of light. With a loud dragon roar, a group of dragon knights quickly expanded and emerged from the specks of light. The Wyrms that they were mounting were obviously hybrids, but they still gave the people a great shock when they flew up into the sky around the expedition in a formation. The knights on the Wyrms were also wearing heavy armor and raising their dragon spears that were each nearly 10 meters long. They were all emitting strong waves of power. The Dragon Knights first spat some flaming dragon breath attacks at the expedition before extending their long spears and charging towards them. The alchemy colossuses that were standing around the expedition naturally became the priority target of the Dragon Knights. The two parties soon collided violently. Legend had it that the alchemy colossuses were the best weapons for killing dragons. Unfortunately, that was not referring to the alchemy colossuses of the Rotterdam Kingdom. Although the Rotterdam Kingdom had researched, developed, and improved alchemy colossuses for thousands of years, their alchemy colossuses were far inferior to the Titan-level alchemy colossuses like Angelano's. They did not have to think at all. Being able to make their alchemy colossuses reach the legendary level was already very hard to come by. Clearly, those who could become Dragon Knights were also the powerhouses of that world. Their nearly 10-meter-long spears were engulfed in a layer of combat energy, and with just one dive, several alchemy colossuses that were attempting to dodge were stabbed in their chests. They managed to stab directly at the spots where the metallurgists were, though it was unclear if it was because the Dragon Knights understood the alchemy colossuses well, or simply thought of them as some sort of creatures. Before the expedition could retaliate, the Wyrms flapped their fleshy wings and spat dragon breath in unison at close range towards the expedition. By the time the expedition resisted the dragon breath and was about to launch a counterattack against the Dragon Knights, the latter had already flown into the sky again and began flying in circles, searching for a new target once again. "Hurry up and help, or we'll all be finished." Seeing that the alchemy colossuses were damaged again, Donald yelled at the expedition again in anger. The alchemy colossuses were the greatest reliance of the Rotterdam Kingdom's team, but now they were completely destroyed in one go. Hence, it was a huge blow to the Rotterdam Kingdom's team. However, there was nothing they could do, Since the characteristics of the alchemy colossuses had already decided that they had to remain in the periphery of the team and sustain the attacks, they couldn't possibly hide among the expedition team. Of course, the people of the expedition also knew that regardless of how useless the alchemy colossuses were, such a battle was inevitable. At least, that would prevent the mages from fighting the enemies head-on. At this moment, Connorus of the Tower of Dusk's team had already begun to show his prowess. He swung his eternal frost blade that was shining with silver light at the dragon knights in the sky. A large space blade appeared out of nowhere in front of a dragon knight. Before the dragon knight could react, his back was instantly cut in half before falling like a meteor into the formation of the heavily armored infantry. With his perfect body, Connorus would be able to remain undefeated even in a fight with ordinary sanctuary powerhouses. Although his power was not enough for him to join the battle between Lin Li and the Immortal King's incarnation, he was still strong enough to deal with the enemies that were attacking the expedition. Connorus' attack seemed to have caused the Dragon Knights to be wary of him, and thus they reduced their dive attacks. Instead, they remained in the sky and shrouded the team in dragon breath. However, that was nothing to Connorus. The power of the Eternal Frost Blade could almost make the range of the attack negligible. Rays of space blade light managed to slash the Wyrms and Dragon Knights. Of course, it was certainly unlikely for them to change the dynamics of the battlefield with Connorus' power alone. The other legendary powerhouses of the expedition had also joined the battle. Ufalusi summoned the Tide of Death, and a large number of undead creatures poured out to attack the enemies by outnumbering them. Although the undead creatures were not capable enough, they could still form a strong force when a large number of them united. Most importantly, Ufalusa's power improved again in the undead world, and with the support of the massive mana that was at the peak legendary level, endless undead creatures surged out from the Tide of Death. On the other hand, the vampire Norfler snuck out of the expedition team and entered the Animus ranks, where he began to set out to kill the enemy commanders. A legendary level assassin was an absolute nightmare for the enemy, and even those of other professions at the same level were rarely able to escape his assassination. Unfortunately, the enemies were not an ordinary army. Otherwise, they would have collapsed long ago due to the assassination of their commanders. However, their current enemies were almost indifferent to the death of their officers. They even began to take advantage of this by trying to lay traps to hold Norfler back. The Crimson Humorous Wyrm, the Lord of Nightmares, and the demon Gordon had also already gone on a killing spree against the enemy. The Crimson Humorous Wyrm's dragon breath formed a trench of flame through the Animus camp. The Lord of Nightmare's mind control attacks had finally come in handy again. He was constantly controlling the enemies to decapitate their comrades. Such a battle was truly meant for Demon Gordon, whose body was made up of rare magical metals. The attacks launched by the enemy warriors could not break through Gordon's defenses at all. Gordon transformed his arms into giant scythes and killed numerous enemies at once. Compared to the Tower of Dusk's team that was launching numerous attacks from all sides, the situation that the teams from the Brilliant Shrine and the Rotterdam Kingdom were facing was less ideal. Almost all the alchemy colossuses had been defeated by the Dragon Knights. If not for Connorus, they would probably have all been destroyed by the Dragon Knights after a few waves of attacks. As for the Holy Light Knights of the Brilliant Shrine's team, they were still having difficulties holding out against the enemy's heavily armored knights, despite having the enhancement of the Holy Light battle song and the support of the Holy Light priests. Although the Holy Light Knight's power had been strengthened by the power of light, they were still facing a large number of heavily armored cavalry from the opposing side. A large colony of ants would be enough to bite an elephant to death. No matter how incompetent the enemy's heavily armored cavalry troops were, they were definitely stronger than ants, and the Holy Light Knights were not strong enough to be considered an elephant either. Although the Holy Light Knight's battle damage ratio was more than 12 to 1, the Holy Light Knights lost their advantage because they were outnumbered. Moreover, the enemies were not just enjoying the numerical advantage, but they were also not inferior to the expedition in terms of quality. Soon, many legendary powerhouses appeared and began to focus on suppressing the legendary powerhouses of the expedition. There were legendary mages, legendary sword sages, archers, orcs, and shamans. Although the legendary powerhouses were not from Anral, their power was definitely not inferior to the legendary powerhouses of the expedition at all. Facing such a powerful enemy, none of the legendary powerhouses of the expedition could slack off. Besides, even if they were just being attacked by the other party, Archbishop Martin and the others had no time to pay attention to the battle in the sky, and could only pray in their hearts that Lin Li would be able to destroy the opponent as soon as possible. It was fortunate the members of the expedition had no time to pay attention to the battle in the sky, otherwise they would probably have lost the confidence to continue fighting. Lin Li, whom they had pinned their hopes on, was now being suppressed by the Immortal King's incarnation, and he could no longer be described as just disheveled. After all, there was a difference of 3 levels between them. At this moment, the domain world that Lin Li had formed using the debris of the stars already seemed to have been shattered under the brutal collision with the Immortal King's incarnation. It looked like it would collapse at any moment. Lin Li's robe was soaked in blood, and if it were not for his strong willpower, he would have long died under the incarnation's arrow. The opponents he had killed in the endless world, in the beginning probably felt the same as he did at this moment. Lin Li never thought that there would be a day when he would be reduced to such a pathetic and disheveled state. However, his enemies could respawn after their deaths in the endless world, and like him now, he could not be revived if he died this time. The incarnation of that immortal king not only possessed a powerful world domain, he also had excellent archery skills that were surprisingly the same as the game archery system of the endless world. Besides, each technique was also thousands of times stronger than that of the endless world. In addition to having the same features, the incarnation reached out and grabbed the domain world, after which a ball of world power turned into an arrow that was placed on the bow. The arrow was then launched at the sky and darted over their heads. With a loud sound of the bowstring vibrating, the arrow flew into the air and vanished, after which countless arrows fell onto Lin Li's domain like meteors. The arrows that were like a meteor shower were a wide-range skill that was not too powerful compared to the other archery skills of the hunter. However, the power possessed by each of the meteor arrows here was almost at the legendary level. They shuttled through the space with whistling sounds before falling densely into Lin Li's domain. In Lin Li's domain world, the earth shattered and the sky collapsed, resembling doomsday. The countless meteor arrows had sped up the destruction of this world. Amidst the endless explosions and roars, the entire world domain was almost turned upside down as the earth and sky shattered into bits. Finally, Lin Li couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. The entire domain world was filled with endless roars, and the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars detached from the domain world uncontrollably. Damn it, if this continues, it's really going to be over. Lin Li could not even be bothered to wipe away the blood at the corners of his lips. He activated his mental strength with all his might to regain control of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars so as to reconstruct his domain world. However, at this moment, an arrow broke through the air and instantly appeared in front of Lin Li. Lin Li dodged it in time, and he manipulated the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars to make them shield him. After a few loud roars, he managed to dodge the arrow by a hair's breadth. However, due to the delay, the Immortal King's incarnation had the time to launch another attack, leaving Lin Li with no time to reconstruct his domain. How could he continue fighting? As a mage of the sanctuary realm, he couldn't even use his own domain. Even if he were to force himself to hold on, he would barely have a chance to turn the situation around. Lin Li couldn't care less about cursing the Immortal King anymore, as it was useless now that he could barely keep his own life. As Lin Li activated the space robe on his body, he was brainstorming for a strategy that he could use to deal with the matter and counterattack. Using the ability to flash in the defense of the debris of the stars, he managed to temporarily preserve his own life. However, he was completely clueless about what to do. After all, the gap in strength was too large, and could not be compensated for with any strategy. Potions, alchemy array, mageth array. Lin Li thought about his fortes, but he discovered to his dismay that even though he had mastered those aspects, and it gave him prestige in Anral, none of them could save him at this time. Compared to Lin Li, who was scurrying away and was in a huge mess, the Immortal King's incarnation looked much more composed and confident. Shrouded in the domain world, he just had to grab arrows from the air which were condensed by the power of the world, and then shoot them at Lin Li effortlessly. However, after dodging several attacks from the Immortal King's incarnation, Lin Li suddenly had some doubts. At this moment, he no longer had the chance to reconstruct a domain world, which was absolutely fatal for a mage in the sanctuary realm. The Immortal King's incarnation did not actually need to use arrows all the time. As long as he suppressed and defeated the domain world, Lin Li probably would not be able to escape even if he wanted to. However, how could the Immortal King's incarnation not have thought of something so simple? Is he still intending to play the cat and mouse game at a time like this? He clearly had the chance to kill the opponent, but he instead chose to tease the opponent like a cat chasing a mouse. Usually, such people would end up dying a terrible death, as that was something that only arrogant, conceited, and lowly fools would do. Besides, although the Immortal King's incarnation had gained sentience, he still was not like a complete human. How could he do such a stupid thing? Could it be that the Immortal King's incarnation is immobile? At the thought of this, Lin Li tried to flee a little further away, but the Immortal King's incarnation clearly immediately chased after him. Seeing this, Lin Li also found his previous conjecture to be ridiculous. As the owner of the Well of the Sun, the Immortal King's incarnation obviously wouldn't be stuck here. Lin Li originally wanted to try a little more, but when he looked over at the Immortal King's incarnation, he got a great shock, and immediately activated the power of his space robe. He then began flashing non-stop. It turned out that the incarnation of the Immortal King, who also seemed to be tired of the pursuit, actually pulled out a real piece of the debris of the stars from his domain world, and placed it on his bow. The debris of the stars was a set of artifacts that contained the power of the origin of the world, and could kill even the dragon of destruction. Lin Li had never used the debris of the stars to kill his enemies before, and had never imagined how it would feel to be attacked by the debris of the stars. This time, the incarnation of the Immortal King was clearly going to give him a taste of it. The incarnation of the Immortal King had pulled out the debris of the stars, raging flames, from the domain world. It was an arrow that was completely formed from flames. It was placed on the stars of fury, and Lin Li made some slight corrections to his vector. With the loud sound of the bowstring, the flame arrow chased Lin Li for a long time, and looked as if it had lit up the entire space. The Immortal King's incarnation had undoubtedly inherited all of the hunter's abilities, and had also seized the right opportunity and timing. When the red flames reached Lin Li could only grit his teeth, bite the bullet, and release his debris of the stars. Polar snow. That went against raging flames. After a loud boom, Lin Li looked a little more miserable as he flew out from the explosion. However, to Lin Li, being able to escape the attack of raging flames was already something worth feeling fortunate for. However, although the situation just now was very frightening and dangerous, Lin Li did not seem happy about escaping at all. At the same time, he did not feel any nervousness or fear at all. He surprisingly became much calmer, which was not like him before. Yes, through that strike just now, Lin Li had felt that the Immortal King's incarnation's control of the debris of the stars did not seem to be as perfect as he had originally thought. It was also certainly because the Stars of Fury was not authentic, but more importantly, it was the problem with mastery. The Immortal King's incarnation's mastery and control over the debris of the stars seemed to be slightly worse than that of Lin Li when he was in the Endless World. Otherwise, with the Stars of Fury that was condensed with mana alone, Lin Li would not have been able to block the raging flames even if he also had the debris of the stars. The Immortal King's incarnation did not seem to want to give Lin Li too much time to think. After raging flames missed, he launched polar snow immediately. The power of polar snow was conflicting with that of raging flames, and after the arrow was shot, the cold air that was emitted made the surrounding space feel like a blizzard. Faced with the power of this arrow, Lin Li didn't dare to slack off at all. He quickly schooled his emotions, and released his debris of the stars to combat polar snow that was coming his way. There was another loud boom, and Lin Li, who was covered in pieces of ice, once again darted out of the explosion. Due to the fact that his space robe was covered in fresh blood, it was also frozen, and became armor-like. However, Lin Li was frowning this time. He did not seem worried, but rather was pondering something. In this attack, Lin Li was already certain that the Immortal King's incarnation probably could only exert 80% of the power that Lin Li exerted when he was in the Endless World. Although he could only exert 80% of the power of the debris of the stars, it was still not something that Lin Li could easily contend with, but that meant that there was actually a difference between the Immortal King's incarnation and the hunter in terms of strength. Back then, in the Endless World, Lin Li used his hunter avatar to kill the dragon of destruction, Azardus, which was a demigod. If the Immortal King's incarnation could reach that level, Lin Li would have just been killed by him, without even needing to flee. That would even save him from suffering. Why was that the case? After the raging flames and polar snow were launched, Lin Li blocked several attacks from the Immortal King's incarnation, and became increasingly certain of his own judgment. At the same time, he finally made a vague conjecture that perhaps the Immortal King's incarnation could use the power of the debris of the stars mostly because he had inherited something from the Immortal King. At the same time, Lin Li also noticed a problem. When the Immortal King's incarnation shot out the debris of the stars, it would cause abnormal vibrations in the well of the sun. Although the pieces of the debris of the stars were shot out quickly, they would also cause the well of the sun, and the entire space, to vibrate violently upon collision with Lin Li's defenses. However, Lin Li could still acutely distinguish in a split second exactly what caused the tremors. How did that help with the current situation? Lin Li was almost certain that even if the Immortal King's incarnation could only exert 80% of the power of the debris of the stars, he would really be too weak to resist the attacks if the Immortal King were to attack a few more times. After all, the Immortal King's incarnation at least had the Stars of Fury condensed with mana, while Lin Li had nothing. Thinking of the Stars of Fury, Lin Li suddenly recalled that, when he first explored the Sky Castle, he used the crossbow of reincarnation to shoot the Stars of Fury on the last floor of the Seven Realm Spiral. He seemed to have allowed the crossbow of reincarnation to possess some laws of the Stars of Fury. At the thought of this, Lin Li quickly took out his crossbow of reincarnation and placed the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, on it. As soon as he did that, he saw the incarnation of the Immortal King, launching another piece of the debris of the stars before he could even attack. It was the rebirth that contained the power of the earth. Lin Li dared not delay at all. He hurriedly raised his crossbow of reincarnation and forcefully pressed down the incoming debris of the stars. Rebirth. Although the crossbow of reincarnation had some characteristics of the stars of fury, it was still far inferior to the stars of fury in the hands of the Immortal King's incarnation. Fortunately, although the rebirth that the Immortal King's incarnation shot was still powerful, it was significantly inferior in speed to Thunderbolt. The Immortal King's incarnation had been launching the debris of the stars, and Lin Li was still not too sure about the judgment he had just made. However, when Lin Li used the crossbow of reincarnation and Thunderbolt this time, he clearly felt that as Thunderbolt erupted, the well of the sun actually vibrated as well. Although the vibration was masked by the vibrations produced by the collision between Thunderbolt and Rebirth, Lin Li still managed to detect it. The debris of the stars, the well of the sun. It suddenly dawned upon Lin Li that he had almost forgotten about the fact that he had obtained the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars in the well of the sun in the first place. Besides, after he took them away, the well of the sun almost collapsed as well because the debris of the stars set was the foundation that supported the existence of the well of the sun. Now, Lin Li had a set of debris of the stars that he had collected and brought over from Manhwa. The set that was used by the Immortal King's incarnation naturally belonged to the well of the sun and acted as the foundation of its existence. Hence, that seemed to explain why every outburst of the power of the debris of the stars would result in an abnormal vibration in the well of the sun. It was because the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars and the well of the sun were a whole in the first place. The well of the sun existed using the power of the debris of the stars. However, how could that alone solve the problem that he was currently facing? Was he supposed to snatch the debris of the stars from the Immortal King's incarnation? If Lin Li was truly capable of doing so, he wouldn't be in such a mess now. Although Lin Li had the help of the crossbow of reincarnation, he was only barely surviving. He was not qualified to truly compete with the Immortal King's incarnation. Besides, Lin Li was now a mage, and not a hunter. He could not compare to the Immortal King's incarnation in terms of archery at all. With the difference of 3 sanctuary realm levels, Lin Li probably would have no hopes of changing the situation even if the Immortal King's incarnation used an ordinary bow. How exactly could he make use of the relationship between the debris of the stars and the well of the sun? Lin Li could vaguely feel that that might be his only hope of turning the situation around, but he did not know exactly how he should go about doing it. If he could calm down and brainstorm about the clues, he might be able to come up with a solution. However, how could the Immortal King's incarnation be so kind as to give Lin Li the chance to think of a strategy? Under the pressure of the Immortal King's incarnation, Lin Li could only try to flee in the sky while passively defending himself against one fatal blow after another. In the face of such an overbearing enemy like the Immortal King's incarnation, Lin Li didn't dare to let himself get distracted at all. Lin Li was well aware of the power of the debris of the stars, and if he were to really suffer a hit, he would lose his life. However, he knew that if it continued to drag the fight out, he definitely wouldn't be able to hold on for long. Whenever the debris of the stars collided, he would be the one getting injured. Hence, he would only collapse sooner or later. Seizing the fleeting opportunity, Lin Li drank 2 potions at once, and finally stabilized his condition a little. However, the major blood loss had already caused him to feel like he had slipped into a trance that would kill him at any moment. It couldn't be dragged on for any longer. Lin Li needed the magical domain. Even though the magical domain would not be able to last long in the face of the attacks of the Immortal King's incarnation, it could at least help him buy some time so that he could brainstorm for a while. However, the previous domain had completely collapsed, after all, and it would take him some time to reconstruct the magical domain. When the incarnation of the Immortal King shot a piece of the debris of the stars at Lin Li again, Lin Li decided to take another gamble. He no longer blocked it with his own debris of the stars, and instead took out the giant pillar-like Titan Dragon Spear from the Ring of Endless Storm. The Titan Dragon Spear was the one that Lin Li had obtained in the Ga mountain range. The Titan remains had already been used to build the Black Front Fortress. Due to the death of its owner, the Titan Dragon Spear had fallen completely dormant, and had little to no use left at that time. Lin Li used it twice before, once against the Double Death Dragons, and once to subdue Angelano. He also utilized only the destructive power of Thunderbolt that it contained. However, the Titan Dragon Spear, that had suffered 2 heavy blows, did not get energized in any way, and was only passively emitting destructive Thunderbolt. There were some cracks in the spear. Previously, Lin Li didn't think of using that item again, and simply kept it in his Ring of Endless Storm as a collectible. This time, Lin Li did not think of using the Titan Dragon Spear as a means to counterattack, and instead treated it as a piece of garbage that could hopefully block the Immortal King's incarnation's attacks for him, even if it could only buy him a second of time. Hence, After throwing out the Titan Dragon Spear, Lin Li did not bother to look over at all. He immediately released the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, and launched a full-on attack on the domain world. This time, the Immortal King's incarnation shot out the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, which was the sharpest of all 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. In fact, if Lin Li still wanted to use other debris of the stars to block the attacks like he did just now, it would probably be impossible for him to do so in time. The enormous Titan Dragon Spear obscured Lin Li's body entirely, and thus it was actually a good option. Of course, the most important issue was whether the Titan Dragon Spear could really block the attack of Thunderbolt, like what the legends claimed. The massive Titan Dragon Spear was like a giant pillar from a temple that was heading straight towards the debris of the stars that came flying towards it. On one side, there were numerous rays of thunderous light, while on the other side, there was only a shabby and ordinary stone pillar. It seemed that anyone could tell which was the stronger one here. However, when the two collided, the Titan Dragon Spear seemed to have detected the aura of destruction, as countless cracks appeared on its ancient and simple-looking surface. Numerous destructive thunderbolts emerged like living creatures, jumping and flickering on the surface. On the other side, the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, seemed to have felt a challenge to its might. All of a sudden, astonishing power emerged from it. It was as terrifying as the power that Lin Li had used in the Endless World to activate the Stars of Fury. With all his might, it seemed like it could destroy everything in the world. In a split second, the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, and the Titan Dragon Spear, that had been in slumber for thousands of years collided forcefully. With the collision point as the center, a large number of razor pythons darted out into the space around them like giant spider webs that covered the heavens and earth. Under the power of the destructive Thunderbolt, large areas seemed to collapse, and the entire well of the sun looked like it was about to be destroyed as well. Even Lin Li did not expect such a situation. Fortunately, the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars finally reconstructed a domain world. Otherwise, Lin Li would have been skinned alive even if he hadn't died from the aftershock of the collision. In that collision, the Titan Dragon Spear, which had been in slumber for thousands of years, seemed to have been invigorated again. The coarse exterior was removed layer by layer, gradually revealing its true appearance. The Titan Dragon Spear was a dragon-slaying artifact that every Titan created after gradual accumulation of the destructive Thunderbolt that they devoured bit by bit since they were young. Hence, the Titan Dragon Spear was in essence created from Thunderbolt. The Titan Dragon Spear looked like a lightning pillar formed by countless intertwined razor pythons. The center of the pillar was the wisp of destructive Thunderbolt that was formed in the void before the world was born from chaos, and although it was present only in a small amount, it gave off an astonishingly destructive aura. However, it would still be too much of a stretch to say that the Titan Dragon Spear was comparable to the debris of the stars. Although the Titan Dragon Spear did not get destroyed immediately in the collision, it was clearly inferior in strength, and was sent flying after being struck by the Thunderbolt. Fortunately, the direction of the debris of the stars was changed after Thunderbolt was blasted away by the Titan Dragon Spear. It immediately pierced through the domain world that Lin Li had just created, but it did not actually hit Lin Li's body. However, even so, Lin Li's domain world once again collapsed and was almost destroyed. Lin Li couldn't care less about the Titan Dragon Spear that had been knocked out of the sky. After dodging the debris of the stars, Thunderbolt, he tried his best to repair the broken domain world while capturing the inspiration that he got from reconstructing the domain world. Originally, Lin Li reconstructed the domain world for the purpose of buying more time for himself so that he could divide some of his attention to deal with the Immortal King's incarnation. In fact, Lin Li had no idea if he could think of any solution at all. He could only consider it a gamble. However, right after successfully constructing the domain world just now, Lin Li gained some inspiration. Since the debris of the stars in the Immortal King's incarnation's hands was the foundation of the Well of the Sun, would he be able to replace it with his own set, and make it become the foundation of the Well of the Sun? If it was possible, wouldn't he become the master of the Well of the Sun? Even if he could not kill the Immortal King's incarnation, with the power of the world domain, he could at least contend with it. Besides, Lin Li had another guess. The Immortal King's incarnation was exactly the same as him when he was exploring the Well of the Sun back then. Did that mean that the other party's existence also depended on the world of the Well of the Sun? Thinking of this, Lin Li felt that he ought to take a gamble since he would not be able to avoid death if he dragged it on like this anyway. Hence, he might as well try and take the risk. To him, his life was already considered a bet that was destined to be lost, so there was no difference between losing the bet and not taking the gamble. However, if he won, he would have the chance to live. However, what would he have to do to achieve that and gain control of the Well of the Sun using his debris of the stars? Recalling the scene in the Well of the Sun, Lin Li suddenly remembered that, when he had obtained the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, he actually collected them from various places, and not from a single boss-level monster. In other words, the original locations of the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars were most likely meant for the sustenance of the Well of the Sun. Now, the incarnation of the Immortal King was holding the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars. Hence, the locations in the Well of the Sun had to have already been emptied out. However, the Well of the Sun was in the world of the Immortal King's incarnation. Hence, it did not collapse due to the absence of the debris of the stars. In that case, if he were to place the debris of the stars back in the spots that he remembered, wouldn't he be able to gain control of the Well of the Sun? Lin Li wasn't sure if his guess was correct, but he was certain that there was no better choice. Lin Li wanted to verify his guess, but was still faced with the tough problem of getting out of this place. Turn around and run. That was impossible. The other party was a top hunter. If he were to do so, it would be no different from suicide. The Immortal King's incarnation was still constantly attacking Lin Li, and all kinds of arrows that Lin Li was familiar with were being launched one by one. While Lin Li was struggling to hang on, he was also looking for a chance to escape safely. However, escaping from a top hunter was not an easy task. However, Lin Li did have a slight advantage, which was precisely the fact that the other party was a hunter, once belonging to him. Lin Li was just as familiar with the skills of a hunter as he was with magic. As long as the Immortal King's incarnation was not using any debris of the stars, Lin Li would be able to clearly know any of the subtle features and flaws of the archery skills it launched. In fact, Lin Li had even discovered through the battle just now that the Immortal King's incarnation still had some of his own flaws from back then. The Immortal King's incarnation was actually more like Lin Li's incarnation in the Endless World. In fact, some of his actions and subtle expressions were almost identical to Lin Li's back then. Watching the Immortal King's incarnation continue to exhibit the archery that he was familiar with, Lin Li knew that it was very likely that the chance that he had been waiting for was there. Indeed, after surviving several waves of the opponent's attacks and scrutinizing his actions, Lin Li's pupils constricted, and he put away the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars that he had integrated into his domain world. He then turned around and flew in the direction that he had thought of. At this time, the incarnation had also begun attacking. A sharp arrow appeared behind Lin Li like lightning, and penetrated his body immediately without obstruction. However, a moment before that, Lin Li, who did not turn back at all, adjusted his body slightly while escaping. The minor adjustment was the very reason he managed to avoid letting the arrow strike him in his vital point. Although he was still hit by the sharp arrow, this result was undoubtedly already a victory for him. The archery skill that the Immortal King's incarnation displayed was the heart-piercing arrow from the Endless World system skill set. Although there was no need to aim at the target when using this skill, Lin Li nonetheless subconsciously squinted out of habit when using it. The Endless World was a game world that placed emphasis on realism. Other than a few particular ones, most skills did not come with the ability to lock onto targets. Hence, it was actually quite normal to squint and aim when shooting. However, every time Lin Li used the heart-piercing arrow, he would immediately open his eyes after squinting because he would realize that it was redundant to squint. That became Lin Li's habit when using that skill. Of course, normal people usually would not be able to notice their own habits. Likewise, Lin Li only realized it after others pointed it out to him. This time, Lin Li finally saved himself thanks to his awareness of that small habit. The power of the heart-piercing arrow was not huge, and its focus was on launching attacks at fatal parts of the body in order to achieve a one-shot kill. Hence, after seeing that the incarnation had launched a heart-piercing arrow, Lin Li immediately put away the world domain that was his lifeline, and turned around to run away. Lin Li could dodge without turning back precisely because he knew where and when the heart-piercing arrow would land. Having gotten the opportunity he wanted, Lin Li naturally did not dare to make the slightest delay at all. He maximized his power of flight and dashed towards his target like a bolt of lightning. Due to the fact that the Immortal King's incarnation was a hunter, he did not have the power of flight skill, and could only fly by relying on the power of the domain world. Hence, it was slower than Lin Li. Besides, since it had to rely on the power of the domain world to chase after Lin Li, the incarnation naturally couldn't take out the debris of the stars that constituted the world. He could only use the arrows condensed by the power of the world to attack Lin Li. After all, the Immortal King's incarnation still relied on the Immortal King's legacy to gain control over the debris of the stars, and not on his own abilities. However, the Immortal King's incarnation was still using the Stars of Fury that was condensed, using mana after all. It was probably only different in quality from the actual Stars of Fury. The true core laws were actually not inferior. Thus, even if the Immortal King's incarnation used the most ordinary arrow, the power that erupted from it would be rather horrifying. Not to mention an arrow made of condensed power of the debris of the stars. Lin Li dared not expose his back to a terrifying hunter, like the incarnation for a long time. Hence, after being struck by the heart-piercing arrow, he immediately fell into the palace of the Well of the Sun like a meteor in a bid to use the intricate and complex buildings to cover himself.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.